Hello there, everyone. A very good afternoon to you. Welcome to this afternoon's CLPL session, brought to you by Dynamic Earth in partnership with the University of Edinburgh and the Changing Oceans Group. My name is Connor Ellis. I am the Learning and Engagement Manager here at Dynamic Earth, and I look after all of our events and experiences that help deliver our charitable mission. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We've got a great afternoon of CLPL for you, focusing on Scotland's marine heritage, the story of the Challenger expedition, some applied research context from our colleagues joining us from the university, and also some really fantastic examples of experiences you can take back to your classroom as well. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover a little bit of housekeeping and groundwork. And first of all, we are recording this session today to make it available to others that weren't able to join us. So by coming to the session today, you are consenting to that. And also, we'll make available all the materials available at the end of this session as well. We'll follow up with you on email. So don't worry about taking lots of notes. We'll send everything out to you as well to keep things nice and simple for everybody. So to kick us off, I just wanted to cover a little bit about us and who we are. Dynamic Earth are Edinburgh's Science and Discovery Centre. Our mission is to empower everyone with understanding and empathy for the planet. And we do that in lots of different ways. You may have been to us before and been around our physical centre, which looks like this in Edinburgh. But we have a really innovative and exciting exhibition, which you go around with your pupils. We have Scotland's only 6K planetarium, which has a whole host of live presenter-led experiences. But we also have our entire school programme of learning and engagement opportunities as well, which give you the opportunities to explore every earth and environmental science topic you can think of with our specialist learning and engagement team. The CLPL today and this programme, Discover the Deep, has been made possible with thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund, who have also funded an extensive redevelopment project in one of our galleries. So if you're coming to the centre soon with your pupils or in the future, you'll get to experience this amazing new exhibition, which tells Scotland's marine heritage story in a really innovative way and also shows off all of the amazing marine opportunities we have across Scotland today as well. Before we go any further, I just want to kick us off with the team who are going to be delivering the session for you today. So my colleagues Blair Watson and Katrina McPherson have done a lot of the content development for this session. So thank you very much to them for that. And also we're delighted today to be joined by Dr. Joanne Vad, who you can see on the screen as well, who's joining us from the University of Edinburgh's Changing Oceans Group. So thank you very much for giving us your time and your expertise today as well. I think that might be enough from me. So we're going to hand over presenters now. I'm going to hand you over to Blair Watson. He's going to kick off the introduction for the session. And I really hope you enjoy the afternoon ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. So hello, everybody. Hoping you're having a fantastic day. So I am indeed Blair. I am the resident marine scientist here at Dynamic Earth and project officer for a amazing new National Lottery Heritage funded project, Discover the Deep. Now, today I'm going to dive in with a quick overall summary of our oceans and our exploration of them over the past 150 years. And I've got about 20 minutes to do this, so no pressure. That's a marine science joke for those of you there that got that one. Well done. Now, I figured here would be the best place to start with the expedition of the HMS Challenger, the first global marine expedition with a ship purpose-fitted entirely for marine science. This was originally a naval corvette, which was stripped and refitted with a specialist equipment, including a state-of-the-art zoology and chemical laboratory. And on board as well was 181 miles, that's correct, miles, of Italian hemp rope, which was used to measure the depth of our oceans. So this is the first time anyone had really explored the deep. So they had no idea exactly how deep it would be, so better safe than sorry there. Now, here we are. The expedition itself was led by Chief Scientific Officer Charles Wyville Thompson, a Scottish marine scientist who was born just outside of Edinburgh, actually. And he managed to convince the Royal Society to fund a global expedition to explore the deep sea for the first time. So this expedition left in December of 1872 with a number of marine specialists on board, as well as an artist, J.J. Wild, who was tasked with documenting the journey and the discoveries of the expedition through sketches. Now, whilst this is what we believe to be the first ever research expedition to have a camera on board, these were a relatively new invention of the time. They were not the most reliable of pieces of equipment, so it was rarely used, and most of the surviving photography is just various landscapes and crew photos, nothing really relevant in terms of scientific content there. Now, if I go to the next slide here, you can see some of the original artwork, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Some of the images that came out of this expedition. You can see here some of the photography as well. So in the top right, we've got these little penguins that they encountered as well. And it shows the diversity of environments that the crew encountered as they explored our oceans. And in the bottom left here, it's the settlement of Edinburgh, not our Edinburgh here in Scotland, but Edinburgh on Tristan da Cunha in the South Atlantic. This is one of the most remote settlements on Earth. So it just shows the range of places that this crew visited as they underwent this voyage. Now here you can see some of the equipment that they used. And although it looks pretty rudimentary, at the time this is all state of the art. And equipment allowed scientists to get a pretty good understanding of the physical properties of the water at the stations that they visited, where they could investigate how saline, so how salty the water was, the water temperature, and they could gather samples of the seabed, and they could look at specimens that they collected as well using scientific trawling. So you can see an example of the trawl on the left of the screen there, that sort of little net thing with the tangles coming down. Now, here, this is some of my favorite imagery from the expedition, are some of the specimens that they collected. And so these stunning illustrations and the associated information they gathered about the different specimens filled 50 volumes, and it took about 25 years for them to complete writing these books and summarizing and collating all this information. Unfortunately, Wyville Thompson, Chief Scientific Officer, he never actually lived to see the finished compendium of his work. The last of the reports were overseen by John Murray, who's now a more prominent figure in the marine science history books. Now, some 4,700 species were named new to Western science after the conclusion of this expedition. And I say new to Western science, is some of the species named new to science were in fact well known in other areas of the globe. For example, they collected the cherry salmon, which was actually discovered at market in Yokohama and Japan there. So known about for centuries, decades beforehand, but new to these scientists. Now, this map, which again, absolutely gorgeous, incredible science here. It's one of my favorite outputs from the expedition, and it's a global map showcasing the general seabed types that are found across the globe. So these seabed types varied largely depending on the depth and locations that they were collected from, but they generally fell in the categories of oozes, clays, sands, and muds here. Now, we've improved the resolution of this map greatly in the past 150 years, but there's still a lot of the ocean still to explore. In fact, we're only up to just around 24% of the ocean that has been explored to high enough resolution. But there is a project, the Nippon 2030 Seabed Project, that's hoping to map the globe entirely by 2030 to this impeccable resolution so we can really understand our seas. Now, I need to mention here a little bit more sinister element of the expedition, and we have to acknowledge this, and that's Challenger's research into Indigenous peoples. Now, measurements of Indigenous people that the crew encountered were made, and artifacts, including human remains, were taken by the crew for further study. These measurements were compiled into one of the 50 volumes produced after the expedition, with the measurements used to further pseudoscientific beliefs of this white supremacy, this sort of Eurocentric white European being the pinnacle of evolution. So we call this scientific racism, and unfortunately it was part of this expedition. Now, I'm going to head on now to talk a little bit more about modern exploration. And we're going to start here with the equipment that scientists these days use. I'm sure Joanne might mention some of these a little bit later on. I'm sure she's worked with plenty of amazing little gadgets that we can explore our seas with. So thankfully, our equipment has improved since the days of the HMS Challenger. However, some techniques such as sieving and scientific dredging continue to this day, and using equipment not that different from what was used 150 years ago. I know in my time as a marine scientist, I sat in the back of a boat in the freezing cold and pouring rain with a little sieve and a little hose as well, getting rid of all the mud to see what creatures we'd collected from the seabed there. Not a fun task, but quite interesting. Now, we do have far better ways these days of mapping our oceans. So mentioned before this use of this 181 miles of Italian hemp rope. We've come a long way since then. We use robots instead, so we can use sound to map the depth of our oceans there. And in the bottom, I say bottom left, it's actually the bottom right of your screen, you will see one of these robots here. This is an autonomous underwater vehicle. So a robot that we can deploy over the side of the ship, goes away, does its thing, and comes back to the ship again. Now, using robots like this, and like our submersibles and ROVs, these are remotely operated vehicles, we can get film footage of the deep sea as well, and we can see just how stunningly beautiful it is down there. I'm going to show you some of that footage right now. Play the video, and there we are. Okay, there. So I hope you use that as a nice Zen moment there, just to take a wee breather. And you can see absolutely incredible imagery down from the bottom of our sea. And this is the Scottish deep sea here. This was filmed in the Northeast Atlantic. My favorite was the Loch Biscuit a wave as we swam by there. That's always a great scene to see. Now, if I go to our next, here we are. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about why our seas are important and why we should be protecting them. So first of all, if we look at ecosystem services, so our oceans do more for us than we give them credit for. And a big field of research is looking into exactly what they do for us. So scientists categorize these into services, and they have four main categories, which you can see on our wheel here. We're going to go through these and just expand on these just a little bit. Now, first of all, is our provisioning services. So these are what we would think of, first of all, when we think of the question, what does our ocean give us? So this includes things like food, energy, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and other more tangible benefits here. Next, if we head on over, we have our cultural services, some of which bring profit, others that can improve our lives in other less tangible ways. So these benefits can be more abstract. For instance, studies show that simply being near the ocean can be beneficial to both physical and mental health. And cultural services encompass any mental benefits through enjoyment in activities such as sailing, swimming, and art, as well as the trickier concept of spirituality regarding the ocean, which is more about the feelings we get from being near the sea, such as a sense of peace or mystery or questioning. And now we can move on to regulating services, which we don't directly see, but they are beneficial to our planet as a whole, as they regulate natural phenomena. And that means here that they might not impact us directly, but they are possibly the most critical service that our ocean provides. Because it's these services that make the planet habitable. Our oceans control the weather, they shape our coastlines, they help in the fight against climate change and break down dilute waste that's introduced to them as well. Lastly, we have our supporting services. And these are the services that ensure that all the other services that we've mentioned here can carry on doing their thing. Essentially, supporting services ensure that our oceans continue to function. So you can see here that these services underpin the functioning of our oceans and are pretty closely tied with those regulating services that I just talked about before. So we've got the food webs, water cycling, so evaporation leading to rainfall, which then washes back into our oceans again. They provide habitats for species, which then brings along our commercial species. They help out with that aspect of things as well, and they cycle nutrients in the water as well. Now, fortunately, it's time to look a little bit in depth at the troubles our oceans are facing. And we're going to run a few activities soon that break down these issues into an engaging format they can use to easily communicate the science behind them with your students. So I've broken down these issues into four main categories. They're not all mutually exclusive, and there is a bit of overlap there as well, so they can be shifted around. So first of all, we have a big issue, climate impacts here. Now, these are a little bit abstract, but they're all having a major impact on our deep sea. So they're all linked by the threat of climate change, and they're caused by increasing carbon dioxide in our oceans. So rising greenhouse gas levels are leading to warming climates, melting glaciers and sea ice, which is releasing massive amounts of fresh water into our oceans. Now, this excess of water is raising sea levels, and it's affecting how our ocean currents function, with this heavily influenced by the balance between fresh and salt water. Now, as water heats, which is happening as our climate warms, the water itself expanding. This is a process known as thermal expansion, as well, again, contributing to rising sea levels. Now, this heat is also leading to stressing of ecosystems within our oceans. So the best example of this would be coral bleaching. So we get marine heat waves, stress the corals, and unfortunately that can lead to mortality events. Now, here are some more direct impacts, with ships contributing to a number of impacts in our seas, from collisions with larger fish and marine mammals, that's your sharks, dolphins, whales, seals. So these are known as ship strikes, to the noise created by ship propellers, which is now recognised as a major source of pollution within our oceans. Now, this is a big issue as sound is incredibly important in the ocean. It travels far greater distances than light, making it a critical stimulus within our seas. So ship contents are also a threat in the event of damage or sinking. So you can have fuel and cargo that can be introduced to the environment, causing a whole range of problems from toxic chemical releases to entrapment within plastic products. We all know about things like our can rings, these plastic rings put around drinks cans that can entrap turtles, things like this. So a whole range of issues, especially with plastics. And then we, of course, have overfishing, which we'll explore in an activity in a little bit as well. Now, I put fish alongside shipping, but could easily fall under here as well. I thought it best to separate them, as this is more in regards to mineral, oil, and gas resources here. So oil spills we've all heard about in the news, for instance, the Deepwater Horizon event and the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989 as well. But the other issue that we have currently hasn't really begun yet, and that's deep sea mining. As we run out of minerals that we need on land, so that's metals to make things like batteries, the prospect of deep sea mining is becoming much more real. So this would be massively destructive to the direct area being mined, but it's also to the surrounding habitats. A sediment that's disturbed and raised into the water then disperses out and it smothers blankets neighboring areas. So as of now, companies are only able to explore possible areas for exploitation, but there is a lot of work going on to legislate how or if we should mine these areas prior to licenses being issued to go then and do so. Now, finally, we have a slightly wishy-washy category that I've kind of made up here. So forgive the pun, wishy-washy. Love a good pun. And this is the impacts from land that are then washed or blown out into our oceans. So we're all familiar with the scourge of plastics, and the chances are you'll have seen in the news the issue of sewage being dumped into water around the UK. So this overloads the waters with nutrients, It leads to algal blooms, these marine plants, and that then creates dead zones as they remove all the oxygen from the water as they then die and are eaten by bacteria. Now, finally, there's this strong link between intensive agriculture and sediment runoff, with overuse of land to grow monoculture crops leading to desertification, which increases sediment runoff into the sea and smothers seabed communities. Whilst intensive livestock farming can lead to increased nutrients being washed into waterways and running into the sea. And this causes similar impacts to those that we saw with the sewage runoff there. Okay, now that is the end of my little segment here, and I now have the privilege to pass you on to Dr. Joanne Vad, who's going to be talking a little bit about her research. So thank you, folks, and I shall see you soon, and I shall hand you over. Take it away, Joanne.
Hi, thanks, Blair. Thank you so much for that introduction. That's great. I'll share my screen and hopefully you will be able to see my presentation in just a moment. Sorry about that. Let me get to the beginning. Can I just check that you can see that all right?
We can indeed, Joanne. Yeah, you're on full screen.
That's perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me to this session. I'm really excited to speak to you all. I'm hoping I can just give you a bit of perspective from an ocean scientist. So yeah, as I said, my name is Joanne Vad. I'm a researcher at the University of Edinburgh. And just to start us off with, just wanted to give you a bit of background. So I work within the Changing Oceans Research Group. This is most of us here at the opening of the Discover the Deep exhibition at Dynamic Earth, which is a really great event. We had lots of fun discovering the exhibition. If you've not been, I'd highly recommend it. It's lots of fun, even for grown-ups. Yeah, it was really great event. As you might hear from my accent, I'm not from Scotland originally. So I'm Danish national, but I was born and raised in France, and that means that I started my studies in France. So I did my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in Paris, studying just quite general biology and ecology. But I always kind of knew that I wanted to focus on marine biology. So I was lucky enough to do a PhD at Heriot-Watt University here at Edinburgh, looking at the impacts of oil and gas activities on sponges. But I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. From there, from my PhD, I just carried on with my work in the Changing Oceans Research Group. We moved over to the University of Edinburgh, so I now become a researcher here at the university. I just wanted to outline a bit the talk today, just to give you a bit of pointers of what I will cover. I'll give you a very brief introduction to the deep sea. Blair's already done a great job at that. We'll talk a bit about the challenges that we have exploring the deep sea. I'll show you some deep sea habitat in a bit more detail, focus a bit on my research specifically, and then I was trying to think why I find deep sea research so interesting, maybe try and help you engage your students, and finally just present a few resources that you can use in your classroom as well. So, well, what do we mean when we talk about the deep sea? So this is a schematic that you might have seen before, just represents our world's oceans from the very shallow end all the way down to the abyss. And when we talk about the deep sea, we basically mean anything that's below 200 meters depth. Why have we chosen that limit? Well, it's because after below 200 meters, we don't have any sunlight penetrating through the water column. So anything that lives below 200 meters depth cannot use directly the sun to produce its energy. Anything above, such as algae or coral reefs, will get some of their energy at least from the sun directly. So it's a very wide and large proportion of our oceans actually that is in the deep sea. And Blair touched very quickly on this before, but we used to say for ages that we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about our Earth's oceans. But actually nowadays we can even say that we know more about the surface of Mars than we know about the Earth's oceans. So we've really only mapped a small proportion of our oceans. And so it's kind of the great unknown still, and that's really what's exciting about this research. So just a few other statistics for you. So the deep sea covers about 60% of our Earth's surface. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a really vast environment. And we know that between 1 to 2/3 of all species in the sea remain to be discovered. So that's about 1 million species, and a lot of those will reside in the deep sea. So when we go out into the field and we collect samples, there's actually a lot of the samples that we get, we can't really say what they are. So that's really, really challenging, but also exciting at the same time. And finally, as Blair has just mentioned, I don't want you to leave the talk thinking, oh, well, the deep sea is very remote, so we don't have to worry about these habitats. There's actually a lot of our activities that have a direct impact on the deep sea. So trawling for fishing is a big one, oil and gas extraction. We've picked up plastic litter all the way down to the abyss, climate change and ocean acidification, sorry. And finally, as Blair mentioned, we're now looking potentially at deep sea mining. So that's a new threat that we're really looking out for, and is quite a worrying one. Now, Blair's mentioned this as well. The reason why we don't know much about the deep sea is because it's really challenging to get our data. So what we use quite often is called a remotely operated vehicle. You have an example of this here. It's a big robot, just to give you a sense of scale. This one is probably about 2 meters tall. And it has a bunch of arms at the front, a bunch of cameras and lights at the front as well, and some cameras at the back. And the idea is that it's brought from this crane into the water. It gets disconnected from the crane, but it still has a cable that connects it back to the ship. And someone, a technician, a highly trained technician on board the ship, has the control of the ROV. And what you have often is you have the scientist, here it's Murray Roberts, the leader of our research group, will then have a talk with the technician saying, oh, can you go a bit over to the left and take that piece of material up, and so on. So the technicians are amazing at and have a lot of patience for our scientists who get really excited when the ROV gets launched. So as I said, we can actually pick up samples with this. So we have arms, manipulators that can be moved around, and we can really go in and pick out very carefully a specific specimen that we would like. We can also put a bunch of equipment at the front of the ROV, which allows us to take different samples. So it's a really handy tool. But as you can imagine, having an ROV on board a research vessel is sometimes quite rare. It's quite expensive piece of kit, and sometimes it doesn't work. It kind of breaks apart. So we still use the good old method that was kind of set out with Challenger. So we still sometimes deploy these kind of rock dredge. These are small nets that go over the seabed. And as Blair said, we collect a lot of mud, and then we have a long, long time sitting, chatting about the specimens, sieving through all of this mud, and just collecting the small, small animals that live on the seabed. I've also sat many hours sieving through in the cold, and I still find it really enjoyable. It still beats a day in the office, I would say, but it is kind of a weird activity to be doing on board a research vessel. So what are we finding when we do get to go down to these great depths? Well, it's a range of habitats, really. Anything from habitats that are very ephemeral, such as whale bone falls. So these are dead whales that will fall to the seabed and get consumed by all of the fauna present, and it's a full feast in the deep sea. But also things that are very, very constant, habitat that have changed very little over time. So things grow around hydrothermal vents or cold seeps, and these beautiful corals that Blair showed you a really nice video of. I don't have time to go into all of these environments. They are habitats. They each have their little characteristics and perks, but I'll focus on two, which our group have focused quite a bit on in terms of our research. The first one is cold water coral reefs. So these are amazing habitats. As you can see here on the picture, they can be really big, and they look a bit like our tropical coral reefs. There's a big difference though. Tropical corals get some of their energy from the sun, but here that's not possible. So these corals, they also have a hard skeleton like the tropical ones, but they have these larger tentacles, and they're basically little mouths that just pick out food from the water column. And that's how they grow. They grow really slowly, think about 1 centimeter per year, but then can create really large infrastructure, which is then used by other animals as their habitat. So here we have the ling. We also have found some shark egg cases. So it's also a nursery ground for larger animals, but all the way to small things. Anemones grow on them, and these carrier crabs, which I think is my favorite deep sea animal. So these are crabs which use their two back legs to carry either sponge in this example or a soft coral here. And this is, we think, to camouflage them from predators. So they just walk around on the reef carrying their little coral or sponge on their back and eating away at whatever they can find deposited on the corals. So this is a whole ecosystem that just gets built around these coral initially. This last picture is something a bit different, but I did want to put it in here. These corals can colonize any kind of hard substrate. And so in the North Sea, where we've had oil infrastructure in place for quite a long while now, if you think back at the initial platforms that were installed in the 70s, we actually see that the corals have started to colonize those. And that creates a whole habitat amongst the platform. So this is kind of a cool example of how these coral reefs can sometimes just appear on our infrastructure. But naturally, we don't actually have to go very far. We're really lucky in Scotland. We have some amazing cold water coral reefs just at our doorstep, really. So this example is from the Mingulay Reef Complex. It's located just here, south of the Hebrides Island. And this area, I don't want to put you too many sciencey slides and figures in here, but I did want to give you a sense of scale. This area is really amazing. It has lots of different spots where the coral reefs exist. The top one here, the Mingulay Reef area, is several kilometers long, and you get a reef completely covering that upper ridge. So it can be really large infrastructure or structures, sorry, these cold water coral reefs, and really amazing places, and amazing that we have them so close to home in Scotland. A second habitat that I did want to quickly touch upon, which is kind of closer to my heart because that's what I did my PhD on, are deep sea sponge grounds. So I am a bit of a sponge nerd, I will be honest, so I can probably talk for hours about these animals, but I won't bore you too much. Sponges are very weird looking animals. They take lots of different shape, and they basically are really good at filtering water. So that's how they get their food. They just sit at the bottom of the sea and just filter lots and lots of water. They don't have any kind of tissue. They don't have a heart or nervous system like we do. It's just a bunch of cells organized together in a very simple but efficient way. It's one of the first type of multicellular organisms that have appeared on our planet. So they've been present on our planet for millions of years. And if you cut a sponge in two, it will just regrow into two sponges. So they're really weird and wonderful in many ways. Because they're so kind of, yeah, they can kind of take any shape. They really have various ways of growing. So you get these round ones, you get these weird looking, strange shaped ones. You can't really describe that. You also have some branching ones here on the rock, or some fan shaped ones, incrusting ones, really anything. I couldn't do a talk without showing you this one. It's also a sponge. We call them carnivore sponges. So they don't filter the water, but they just grab whatever food is in the seawater. And to me, that looks like something that should be on another planet, really, just completely alien to us, but really wonderful that these grow in the deep sea. And exactly the same way as the coral reefs, they create a habitat. So when they're present in big aggregation, they create sponge grounds, and they are homes to crabs, shrimps, snails, fish, and they just kind of stay around the sponges, use them as a habitat. And again, we have them just next to Scotland. So up north from Scotland, we have the Faroe Shetland Channel Sponge Belt Marine Protected Area. It's quite a long name, but this area is just full of sponges. And I do want to highlight, it's also an area where we have lots of oil and gas activity. So this is a really good example of a place where we have an amazing deep sea habitat and also quite a heavy industrial footprint. And so we need to manage these areas really well. And that brings you a bit to my research. So I'm really interested to understand how these deep sea ecosystems are impacted by human activities and climate change. And I kind of do this three ways, if you will. I do some image analysis from these remotely operated vehicles. I do some experimental work in the lab, and then I spend a lot of time on the computer analyzing data that's been collected over time. We call those time series data. I'll quickly give you an overview of each of these. So the deep sea analysis, we basically collect a lot of images from the remotely operated vehicle, and we try and analyze them in clever ways to be able to get an idea of how well the ecosystems is growing. In this case, we measured coral colony and tried to assess how healthy the area was. So a coral colony in the deep sea is actually made up of 2/3 of the colony is actually dead skeleton. So this is the black area that you see here. And only 1/3 is this white live part of the coral. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that the dead coral underneath is bad news. It's actually the way naturally how the coral grows. It has to do with how much food it can get access to. And the dead part is actually really important because that's what gives the coral this 3D structure that really gives a habitat to a lot of other animals. And so a lot of other things will actually grow on the dead part of the coral colony. So it was really important to us to get those measurements to try and say, okay, well, a healthy colony, 2/3 should be skeleton, 1/3 should be the live part of the coral. But I also do experimental work. Now, this is really tricky to do on deep sea animals because we're really bad at bringing them up to the surface and keeping them alive. They're really fragile. So a lot of time we actually use shallow water animals instead. This is an example of a sponge that grows absolutely everywhere in Scotland. If you go rock pooling at a low tide, you might spot it bright orange or bright yellow. It's called the breadcrumbs sponge. And we can take that off the rock and then put it in our labs. And so this is a picture from one of my experiments. It looks a bit like a mad scientist experiment, which is quite why I like it. Basically, we put the sponge in its individual little chamber, and then we pumped through a water that was polluted with oil and other chemicals. And then we can take our little sponge and do all kinds of clever measurements and get a sense of how the sponge reacts to chemicals. So in this study, we showed that sponges are quite vulnerable to oil, and an oil spill could therefore create quite a big issue in the sponge ground. And this brings me back to the Fair Shetland Channel, where this could happen. So we're trying to create experiments that can provide important information for management of these areas. So a lot of time I actually look like this, all covered up, because our experiments are usually run in what we call the cold room, which is like a big fridge at 5 degrees. So I spend a lot of time in a big fridge with some sponges in some tanks. So it's a bit of a weird word and a weird job. Very briefly, I did want to mention time series analysis. So a lot of time we're actually analyzing data that's been collected by others before us. So when we've collected things over time, we can kind of see how they change. So this example, it's actually colleagues from Canada who every year, twice a year, have gone out and collected plankton. So these are tiny animals living in the water column through these kind of nets. And they've done this since 1999. And now we have this amazing data set to try and see how things have changed over time. And what we see generally is that the species that are increasing over time are warmer water species. They tend to be meat eating, so they eat other zooplankton, and they're larger. And they're these kind of weird jellyfish-like plankton. Things that are decreasing over time are colder water species. They're usually plant eating, and they're quite small. And these are little like shrimp-like almost plankton. And just seeing this small change in which species are doing better than others can really have big repercussion for things in the deep sea, because you have to think that this plankton that sits in the water column below ultimately will sink down to the deep sea, and that's a big chunk of food for the deep sea organisms. So we always have to look also at what's happening above. So seeing these changes between 1999 is actually something that we are quite interested in pursuing further and seeing if it could have any repercussion for the deep sea. Now, I was trying to think when I was preparing this talk about what I find interesting about my work ultimately, and how maybe that can help with you guys engaging your students or us engaging others. And I have to really be honest here. The first thing that jumped into mind was that when I was a little girl, I loved reading all kinds of adventure books. And I was an absolute fan of Indiana Jones. Still am to a certain degree, although I have realized that those movies are very, very cheesy. And so I think I really got into marine science because I wanted to become some sort of Indiana Jones of the sea, basically. And to a certain degree, that is what some part of my work is. So some are pictures from the last deep sea expedition that I went on in 2019. So this was on the Canadian Coast Guard vessel, the Atmanson, which is an icebreaker. And we had to be helicoptered out to the ship. So we had to wear these weird and wonderful survival suits. We were picking up equipment that'd be left at the seabed for a year. That was really exciting when we saw it pop up to the surface again. We were really relieved. And then the last few days, we had to break ice with the ship to try and get back to the harbor. And I think, those are just beyond the science, just amazing life experiences that I've gotten through this work that I do. But I've felt like this isn't very helpful to you guys because you can't bring your class of primary school students out to a research vessel, or if you can, it's quite rare, quite a rare opportunity. So I thought about it a bit further, and I thought, well, it doesn't need to be deep sea, right? It's quite nice to just be out near the sea. So these are pictures from our cohort of master students that we teach, and we just bring them out to the seashore, even though it's a coral oriented course. It's just nice to go out and start doing surveys, explain how we gather the data. So any opportunity to be out there, I think that's really nice. That is a big part of why I really enjoy my work. But if I'm honest, really, I really started thinking about this weekend. It's like actually even going out to the shore, that's a very small proportion of my time. Most of my days I actually spent like this. I spent time on my computer trying to make sense of these time series data lately. That's been my main focus over the last year or so. And so I really spend a lot of time on my computer, and I was trying to think, well, why do I still enjoy that part of my work? And I think it's because it's still a bit of a mystery. So I try and make these really complicated plots to try and see if there's changes in one way or another. And I spend lots of time thinking about this, and it's still kind of trying to get that sense of mystery and adventure. Even though it's at a computer, it can still be really, really cool. So I hope that's not too much of a cheesy answer for you about how to engage other. I guess it's trying to communicate that sense of exciting, of discovering something new, even if it's boring computer work. Just to finish, I have 3 main resources that I thought I would highlight for you guys. I don't know how much time I still have left, so I'll just cover those quite briefly. But I did want to highlight it because I think it could be really helpful for you when you're doing activities with your classes. The first one is the Atlas website. That's a project which we have now finished, but Dynamic Earth was a big partner of, and we've produced educational packs that are really meant for you guys. They cover a wide range of subjects from hydrothermal vents, ocean acidification. There is one educational pack about what is an animal, what's a mineral, and what's a plant. And they really, if you open the packs, you'll see there's an introduction for the teacher and then a whole host of activities that you can do with your class. So it really covers a lot of ground. There's some coloring pages that you can download an app to actually see them pop up as a virtual reality kind of thing. So that's quite fun. There's a deep sea creature quiz. And yeah, so I'd really highly recommend it. It's all on the website. It's all free, open access, and please have a look. The second resource that I also wanted to highlight for the deep sea is the Deep Sea Spy website. So this is from our partners in France. Ifremer is the big research institute in France. They also have made educational booklets for different class levels. These are kind of really fun. They have crosswords, find differences. They have bits about the deep sea, so you also get a bit of teaching through these kind of games. There's an online game, so you can actually go and annotate these deep sea pictures. Some of the website is a bit still in French, some is still being moved over to English, but the booklets are available in English and the game is also available in English. So I definitely recommend you having a look at that for fun. The last thing is a bit different. It's probably for slightly older kids, probably between 9 and 12. And it's Frontiers for Young Minds. So it's not deep sea specific, but I did want to highlight it nevertheless. It's a scientific journal that's written for kids and edited by kids. So you can become a reviewer. So that's a whole class or an individual kid can become a reviewer and actually provide feedback to the scientists about how to write their article so that it makes more sense to them. And so just a really nice way of, I guess, training the critical thinking in children. You have lots of articles about there. Some are about the deep sea, but the latest edition of the journal was actually written by some Nobel Prize winners. So it's really highly good quality science that are presented in a kids-friendly way on this journal. And again, it's open access, so everyone can go and read it and potentially take part as well. That's me for today. I hope you enjoyed this talk. I'm happy to take any question if there's time. And yeah, that's all from me, I suppose.
Well, thank you very much for that, Joanne. It's always a pleasure listening to you talk. And I have to say, I was on Team Coral after speaking with your colleagues before. You might have moved me over to Team Sponge. They are very, very cool. I don't know whether I can call them creatures or not, but they're cool things at least. Now, you chatting about that is actually very, very useful because having talked about the resources, which Connor is going to find hyperlinks to and pop in the chat, we are going to move on to some resources from Dynamic Earth as well. And these resources are all about building up ocean literacy. Now, we've covered how the ocean is so important and the threats that it faces. Now it's time to show you some ways to help engage your students with our seas. And as an island nation, it's vital that we understand the impact that we have on the ocean and how much it means to us. So this is ocean literacy. There's three main qualities of an ocean literate person. So first of all, we have understanding the importance of the ocean to humankind, being able to talk about the ocean in a meaningful way, and making informed and responsible decisions regarding the ocean and its resources. So we've touched a lot on that already today. Now, the activities that we've created are aimed at sparking an interest for the ocean and inspiring action for change. And first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have to offer here at Dynamic Earth. So you've already taken the first step by being here today into building your ocean literacy. And if you want to dive deeper, we have online ocean CLPL too, so I will show you where that is in just a moment. We have a whole host of resources for educators on our online platform, Dynamic Earth Online. I'm going to share my screen now and show you that. Let's hope the technology works for me here. So if I go here and here, hopefully you can see my screen now. So this is Dynamic Earth Online. I'm sure we'll be able to pop a link, a hyperlink into the chat there for you as well. Oh, it's already in, perfect. So we have a whole host of resources, and it's not just on oceans. At Dynamic Earth, as Connor said, we look at a whole host of environments. We look at the Earth as a whole. So we can look at climate sustainability, we can look at nature, planet Earth, we have activities, we have a whole load, and we are in Gallic as well. Now, if you head to the For Educators section here, you will find our online CLPL courses, and as well, you can head down to our learning pathways. Now here we have, if I select our Discover the Deep Learning pathway, you will see that we have all our curriculum links at the top here, and we have essentially built a lesson plan for you here so you can look through and see these resources. So we have videos that you can watch, we have activities that you can do, and we have things for you to read as well. So that is all available free online for you at Dynamic Earth Online. And this is the more formal side of things. You can also head back to the main area here. And if you just go to, for example, oceans here, you'll see there's some more general things to look at as well. So we have profiles of different marine scientists. So this is looking at specifically marine scientists here. We have activities, we've got videos, we've got a whole range of resources. So please head on over and explore whenever you would like. Now, the Lego challenge is always a winner. Lego, just, you can't beat it. Okay, so I'm going to come out of here now. Let's see if I stop sharing. Okay, and I'm going to go back to our slides. Hopefully this is going to work. And voila, perfect. Resume, that's what I'm looking for. Excellent. So that was our online Dynamic Earth Online here. So if you want, let's go. Where are we going next? In fact, now I'm going to run through a few different activities as well, and we would be here for days if I showed you everything that we have to offer here at Dynamic Earth. So I've selected a few popular ones from our suite of ocean-related activities. So we've broken this down into a few categories. So we've got general ocean knowledge. We're going to be looking at ocean exploration, so looking at things like those ROVs that Joanne and myself have been talking about. We're going to be looking at unsustainable fishing and ocean acidifications, this big threat to corals. And I'm going to be running through a few demos with you just now, just explaining all of this. And our first activity, I'm going to be talking a little bit about pressure. So I'm going to put myself on full screen and I'm going to run through this demonstration just now. So what you're going to need for this activity is a little syringe, just a wee plastic syringe here, and some marshmallows. Now I should say every activity that we're doing here, all the equipment that you need for it is easily available and cheap as well. So what you're going to do to talk about pressure in the ocean, because pressure is a really important concept to know about when you're talking about how life can survive at depth. So if you imagine you've got thousands upon thousands of meters of water on top of you squishing down, you're going to be feeling that pressure. Humans can't survive at depth, whereas certain creatures have adapted to be able to survive in these extreme conditions. The best example of that is the blobfish. So if you've not heard of that before, go and Google it. It's had a bit of a bad rep in life. It's been called the ugliest animal in the world. It is not. It is actually quite adorable if you see it at the bottom of the ocean. Unfortunately, when we bring it up to the surface, there is no pressure holding it in shape. So when it gets to the top, it expands out and it looks pretty horrendous. So what you can do is you can demonstrate this with your students. So open up your syringe here into two parts. Then we pop in our marshmallow, just like so, and pop the plunger back in. And you're going to push that. I'm going to put that as close to the camera as I can. Hopefully you can all see that. Where I put it over my shirt, so it's a bit dark. You're going to push that syringe all the way down to just above the marshmallow and no more. You don't want it touching the marshmallow. Then pop your finger over the end of this syringe. And what we're going to do is, whoop, let's change the lights a little bit. Hopefully you can see that a bit better if I go like that. Yeah, there we are. So what you're going to do is you're going to start pulling out the handle of the syringe. And what you should be seeing is a little bit tough, is that marshmallow getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's because we're lowering the pressure. It's expanding. So I'm going to let go and it will return to its normal size. And what we can instead do is if you pull that syringe to just the top, just like so, and pop your finger over it now and push down, you will start to see that marshmallow getting smaller and smaller and smaller because we're increasing the pressure. So you blew up your blobfish before, and now you are squishing your little human diver. There we are, so that's pressure at depth. So this is a nice, easy, interactive, and it's really engaging for your students. Just make sure they don't eat the marshmallows, because if you run through this a few times, then they get a bit gross. All right. Now, if I share my screen again, we'll have a look at what the next interactive is. Okay, so we are heading on now to bioluminescence. So this is a little video just to explain or showcase what bioluminescence or biofluorescence is, and it's gorgeous. So these are all Scottish deep sea creatures. These images were provided by a local photographer. All right, so this is a really important adaptation of a lot of deep sea creatures. There's no light in the deep, so a lot of these creatures can produce their own light, or in the case of biofluorescence, what they do is they can absorb light and give it out later. So they can do this for a number of reasons. First of all, it might be to attract prey. So if you think back to the film Finding Nemo, don't know if any of you have ever seen that before. Hopefully you have. There is the anglerfish, and that uses a small light on the end of a rod on its head to attract prey, and as soon as the prey gets close enough, down come the teeth. Now, another reason that we might want to use light in the deep is to scare off predators. We can use this light to make us seem bigger than we actually are. And finally, you can use it for camouflage. So some creatures, and just below what we call the sunlight zone, so that's where the light in the ocean penetrates. Some creatures, as they're swimming along, they can cast a silhouette, a shadow from above. So if you're a predator looking up, you might see this dark shadow. So some creatures illuminate the underside of their body to blend in with that light coming from above. So essentially acting as a camouflage that become invisible to these creatures down below. So we've come up with a little game that you can play with your students. And all you need is a small torch, just like this. And what we've done is we've covered it with a little bit of blue film, just to give it a bit of color there. And blue is the longest wavelength, so we can see that best in the ocean. Red light is pretty much invisible in the deep. So what this game looks at is why these creatures might use this luminescence. So what we do is, if I go to the next slide, we'll send this slide out to you, or we might already have done. You will have a little animation, and you'll have some creatures, some prey. So you'd shine your torch, keep it shining on these creatures, and they will then disappear. Next, you might have a predator coming along, and when your predator appears, you're going to want to flash your light and scare it off, make yourself seem bigger than you already are. And last of all, you might just have a plain screen, or maybe a blue screen. You can get your students to shine the light on themselves, so they are camouflaging themselves and blending into that background. This is a really fun game. You can engage your students for ages and ages. They want to play it over and over. It's fantastic fun. Now, our next experiment, we have sent out to you a little pack. And in that pack, you should have this here. So this is a reef mat, we call this, and you should have a little key as well explaining what the species are. So what you can do is you can laminate these keys if you'd like to, and have your students tick them off when they find them, just using a whiteboard marker, so you can reuse it over and over. And this is quite a good resource to have, because this is the Scottish deep sea. This really brings it home for your students. And it's a really simple but engaging activity. So all you do is print this out, hand it out, like I say, laminate it as well if you'd like to. And it can be any size depending on what group sizes you want to work with and what printers you have available. You can even have it on a big screen if you'd like as well. And both of these can be found by Googling Atlas Reef Mat as well. So if you lose the copy in the future, Googling that Atlas Reef Mat, so that Atlas resource that Joanne talked about before, and a fantastic resource to have. And by looking at the animals on the sheets, the kids can learn about all the different animals that call cold coral water, cold coral reefs their home. Try saying that 3 times fast. Now, next of all, we can look at ocean exploration. And to do that, first of all, we have a video to show you. And this is looking at the impact of fishing. So this is the net game. So children act as coral or fish, and a net swept over them, trying to catch them to highlight the impact of bottom trawling. So I'm going to run this video so you can see just how it works. Okay, so you can see there, even if there is some fish left over at the end of the game, because there's no coral, there's no habitat, that just brings home the importance of these cold water reefs again. And if you don't have a net, you can use things like a sheet. And if you don't have these fish hats and toys that we use there, you can just print off some pictures of a fish or get them to draw their own picture of a fish as well. Even get them to do a little bit of research to figure out which fish are in the area that you're trawling. Okay. Now we have our grab sampling game. So what we can do here, now I've skipped a couple actually. So we've done the reef map, but we've not done the grab sampling and the sifting. So to do that, what we need is our grab sampling. First of all, we can use our bean bags and we need a blindfold as well. And all we do is we get our students to work in pairs or teams. One person puts a mask over their eyes, or they basically need to get blindfolded somehow. And your other students that are in this team are going to be the pilots of an ROV. And what they're going to do is they're going to move their ROV to try and get a hold of these bean bags here. And they can either then collect them, and that's a point, or they can bring it back to their research ship or its designated area and put down these bean bags into this area. So these are their fish or coral samples that they're collecting there. So this needs a bit of space as well to this game, so you can take them outside, and just stress your students as well that there's no running. It's a nice safe game, so we want them to just walk and they can practice their lefts and rights, things like this as well. Now we also have our sifting game that I was talking about there, our demonstration. And Joanne and I talked a little bit about that before. So sifting through mud or sand to find specimens, counting them. So we have a little demonstration that we can do here. And what you're going to need is, first of all, a tray, just like this one here. You're also going to need a little sieve of some sort. So we got a little plastic set here, some sand, and inside that sand, you can pop either some printed out little pieces of paper with pictures of starfish or worms, things that you might find in the mud, or we've got these little toys that you can get off. I think we got these off Etsy for a couple of pounds here. So you mix these into the sand, just like so. You want to hide that. And then you have your students sift through this sand, and they're going to shake it about. So it can get a little bit messy, this one. And then you can either use this to talk about numeracy, so you can get them to count them. You can look at the proportion of different creatures that you find, so look at percentages, things like that as well. You can build it to whatever level your students are working at. So this is a really nice, easily adaptable experiment you can use with a whole host of different classes. It's quite good fun as well. Now, last of all, if I get rid of this, pop that out of the way, try not to spill it. We have our bromophile blue and our vinegar and chalk. So these are experiments that we can use to talk about ocean acidification. So we talked about climate change and how this is greenhouse gases rising into the atmosphere that's warming our planet. But what our oceans are doing is giving us a huge favor. They're taking in a lot of these greenhouse gases, a lot of this carbon dioxide. And as they do that, they're lowering the temperature of our planet. So we should be a lot warmer than we are just now. But this comes at a cost because our oceans are getting more acidic. And as they become more acidic, what's happening to things like our cold water reefs and other creatures that rely on something called calcium carbonate, that's what they use to make shells and skeletons, this is becoming weakened and it's starting to break apart. So we're starting to see these effects on our reefs. They're getting something called coral porosis, much like osteoporosis in humans. It's a bit of a tricky concept to demonstrate, so we've got a couple of little simple demonstrations here to show this. So what you can do first of all is you'll need 2 jars, some with water, which I'm going to pour out just now. Here we are. So our first jar with some water, and our second jar is going to have vinegar in it, just here. So again, you're going to want to supervise this one because it can get a little bit smelly if it gets spilled. So as well as this, you're going to need some chalk. So chalk is made of the same stuff as these shells and skeletons, that's calcium carbonate. And what you can do is you can take a piece each and pop them, if we can do this, into our jars. And you can get your students to look at the difference between what's happening to our chalk that's just in water and our chalk that is in the vinegar here. So you can see it's starting to bubble away a little bit there, it's starting to dissolve. So you can use this to talk about chemical terms. You can talk about dissolving, solution, things like this. You can adapt it to the level that your students are working at. You can even make it into little scientific investigation. You can dilute your vinegar into different concentrations and maybe look at how long it takes for your piece of chalk to dissolve. So you can adapt this in several different ways. So you can make it quite a fun little half day, a little day of experimentation. And last of all, to look at how our oceans are becoming more acidic, what we can do is we can use stuff called bromothyle blue. Now, this is relatively easy to get hold of. So if you look at any educational resource provider online, then they should have that, or Amazon has that as well. So this is this bromothyle blue solution. And all we need is a jar. We fill it with some water, just like this. You are, we need a straw in here as well. Doesn't matter what type of straw. And I'm going to add a dash of our bromothyle blue. Pretty liberal with this, just add in a dash. Like so. So it gives us a nice dark solution here. Now, what we do is you're going to blow in through the straw. And as we blow through, we're giving out carbon dioxide in our breath, and this is going to acidify the water. And our bromothyle blue here, this is a pH indicator. So this is going to change color to indicate that our water is becoming more acidic, just like our oceans are as we introduce more CO2 from burning fossil fuels. So let's give this a bash here. It does take a minute, and make sure you take a good deep breath as well. So I don't know if you can see that, but it has changed color quite a bit. We've now got this light yellow color here. So this is a really fun activity to do with your students, and it's quite engaging and visually engaging as well. It's fun to see that chemistry in action there. So the children love it. There we go. So that is the last of our activities here that we've run through. And that is unfortunately the end of our session as well. But I would just like to say a massive thank you to everyone for coming along. We sent out a whole list of links that you can follow, different resources. We'll send out Joanne's links as well. And please, we have a whole range of workshops that we do in the building as well. So if you're able to, do come and visit us and have a look at our galleries and maybe visit our planetarium as well if you are able to. And keep an eye out because we will be doing other CLPL sessions in the future. So we do have a newsletter that you can subscribe to as well there. Now, if you have any questions, we might have a couple of minutes there, but otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. And a massive thank you again to Dr. Joanne Vad, who has been absolutely exceptional. Thank you, everyone.